I'm Austinlugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about The Exorcist III.
Before we get started today, just a quick shout out to our friends at Anime Pass or Fail. They watch 3 to 4 anime series every season. 2 of them are picked by the hosts themselves, and 2 of them are picked by you, the listeners. It's pretty fun if you're really into anime. I've never been a big anime fan, but after listening to the podcast, I am trying to get into it. Maybe. I don't know. Andrew, what's a good place to start with anime?
Well, I guess if you're talking shows, I'm partial to Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, that's great. I've seen one episode.
But I guess my favorite movies are Akira and stuff like that. And those are really good too.
Are you gonna watch the live action?
No, I mean, I don't think I even well, it'll depend. If for some reason it comes out and people are like, it's really good, I'll watch it. But I have no high expectations. I found out about it the other day. I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's the thing that they're doing. They should just put the series on Netflix if they're gonna make the live action. You can't watch the series on Netflix. They should put it on there. It's bullshit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll watch the first episode and see how I feel because I do like the cast a lot. I think it's a pretty good cast. There's some good writers on it. I mean, doubt it'll be as good as the show, but I'm interested to see what they do. Like, how's it look?
I guess.
All right. So today we're talking about Exorcist 3. Andrew, this was your choice this week. You chose Exorcist 3 because, well, actually, why did you choose Exorcist 3?
I chose it because it's very, very good. This month we're doing horror movies and stuff like that, scary movies, whatever. And yeah, I picked Exorcist 3. They just put it on Netflix this month, and this is the second time that I watched it. And I watched it maybe a handful of months ago. And I'm a huge fan of it. I'm still a huge fan of it. I love it. Yeah, and it's fantastic. 1990, directed by William Peter Blatty, also written by him, who of course wrote the novels as well. And he also worked on the writing on that movie as well. And this movie he directed and also wrote. This movie is based on his novel Legion, but because they want to bank off the success of the first movie, call it Exorcist 3. I don't think Blatty wanted it to be called Exorcist 3. I think he just wanted it to be called Legion. But yeah, it's Exorcist 3. And yeah, I guess, Austin, would you be able to summarize the movie in any way?
So The Exorcist 3, despite many production problems and a lot of butting heads between Blatty himself and the production company that was producing it, I don't remember which production company it was, one of the big studios. Despite all that, the film is a follow-up to the original Exorcist. They basically ignore everything that happens in Exorcist 2. That's just non-canon. And it follows a few of our main characters, specifically the detective that was in the original and one of the priests. 15 years later, and in this film, there seems to be, despite The Exorcist having been successful, they're following this series of murders that take place that are representative of this guy called the Gemini Killer, and the detectives trying to figure out who this new Gemini Killer is, which of course happens to be
The bad guy.
bad guy.
I haven't seen the second one. I've heard it's not great. It is on HBO Max, so I think I'll watch it soon. But I know that the second one focuses more on, and I forget the name of the character and I forget the name of the actress, but it's the character who becomes possessed in the first movie.
Reagan? Is it Reagan? Regan?
I forget, but I know that the second movie focuses more on her. I haven't seen it yet, but I will soon. But I've seen the first one a few times as well, and of course I'm a huge fan of the first movie. Great movie. But I'm willing to say that the third movie I think is about as good as the first movie, at least, in my opinion. But anyway, you summed it up well. It's definitely more of a detective kind of thing than the first movie. The first movie has a detective, which is the George C. Scott character. It's the same character. And yeah, like I said, Blatty also directed the movie and he wrote it. And I guess kind of getting into it, the movie starts off with, spookily enough, you get these great images of it's a church. I think it starts out off, it's in Georgetown once again, like in the first movie. It's a church and stuff. And Blatty's directing style is pretty evident in the first couple shots or first opening bit where he kind of quick cuts between different objects in a room or something. You know what I mean?
He loves to do that. Almost all the establishing shots is cut of this, cut of this, cut of this, cut of this, and then they're in the room. It's like the first like 45 minutes.
Yeah, he'll like transition that too. He'll like like it'll be like the end of a scene or maybe the beginning of a scene, and then he'll like do that, and it kind of like serves as the transition. And yeah, it's like the opening shot or the opening part of the movie is like, well, first of all, it's like I think the opening shot is like a guy like rowing, and then I think it's like it starts off with like a church, and it's he's showing all these different objects, and like doors blow open and there's wind going everywhere, and then it's almost like and then they have like during the credits sequence you see like them like going through the streets outside the church, and there's this like little kid too that they kind of like walk by, and he's wearing like a cop kids club shirt or something like that, and you're like, okay, that's weird. And then shortly after that you are introduced to, I forget the name of the character, I think it's Father Dyer, who he's doing like sacrament at this church or something like that. And Father Dyer, I believe, is the friend of Damien Karras in the first movie. They're played by different actors. William, played by George C. Scott, and Father Dyer are in the first movie, but they're played by different actors in both movies. Except for Damien Karras. Damien Karras is played by the same actor. I love the beginning part where you check in on Father Dyer and William, the detective, where they're like hanging out and stuff, and like them kind of like doing their thing, and then they go and see each other. I love that opening bit. It's like very chill.
Yeah, I will say the first 2/3 of the film, it feels very, and the director Blady, he only directed 2 films in his whole career. He directed this film and 1 film before it. He did write a lot of screenplays, but he never really did much in the world of directing. And that's, I wouldn't say it's necessarily apparent. I know he had a lot of trouble getting this film the way he wanted, and we'll get into later some of the stuff that he didn't want that ended up in the final cut. And there's like this sort of director's cut that came out later that has a couple of different things, and which I haven't seen. I'm pretty sure the one we watched is not that cut.
No, it's not.
But there is a lot of, especially in the first 2/3, a lot of Paul Schrader-esque directing styles of it. And by that, I mean, this is someone who is a novelist first, a writer first, and a director second. And you can see that a lot.
Writerly movie.
Yes, it's a very writerly movie. Very similar to, I guess, like almost like Coffee and Cigarettes, where the first half or third of film is kind of just people sitting around in rooms having philosophical conversations about different things, especially when you talk about the conversations between the detective and the priest, which is fine. It certainly has its own merits to it as much as anything else, but it's definitely a lot of that at the beginning, which personally I'm not like a huge fan of. Of course, the most famous example of that we've talked a little bit before is My Dinner with Andre, which is just 2 hours of 2 people sitting in a room talking, which I think has its merits, but I don't really see that as, I don't even really put it in the world of film. Not that this is that, but you can definitely see how like a novelist making a film, there's tons of really great references to, all these great novels and tons of references to Shakespeare and the like, which I really enjoyed.
I love writerly movies. I think they're very, and this one specifically, it is a very writerly movie, but given the fact that like Blatty is like a very like you might say inexperienced director, I mean he does like direct the hell out of the movie. Like it's he really does like a really good job, especially like as the movie progresses. But yeah, like we talked about, like Father Dyer and the detective, it's supposed to establish that they're both kind of I don't know, feel kind of like finished with their careers, I guess you might say. They're both kind of like tired with what they're doing. I love to like, so they're both gonna go see It's a Wonderful Life together, because they do every single time. They both establish that they see the movie this time of the year because it's around the time when Damien Karras died, their friend. And they both say to different people, oh yeah, I'm gonna go see the movie because he gets all sad during this year. They say the same thing about each other, which I think is very funny. And yeah, they go see the movie. First of all, George C. Scott is amazing. I love George C. Scott in this movie. He's a great actor. He's got a great voice. I love the little story he talks about why he doesn't want to go home because his mother has a fish in the bathtub. That's so random. Is there actually a fish in the bathtub? You never actually see it. Like, it doesn't matter. It's like just like a funny story. But they go and have like lunch or breakfast or dinner or something like that. And they talk a little bit about the murder case that he's working on.
I think one of the things that Blady does a lot in this film, except in the final third of the film, is he doesn't show a lot of violence, which I think is interesting and certainly very opposed to the original. Right, in the original, it's a very quiet film. It's a lot of visuals. I think this is a really interesting juxtaposition to the original, because where the original, the dialogue's kind of secondary to the visuals, this one, the visuals are secondary to the dialogue. And something that Blady's really interested in is talking about violence without showing violence, which I think is very admirable, and something that, I think is done really well. And so in this film, they talk about the black boy who was murdered, head was cut off, and in its place they put Jesus Christ's head, which is like very vivid. They don't show it. I mean, I guess they kind of do later, but they don't show it at this point. And it's a very terrifying visual without ever having to see it.
Yeah, the way that he describes the way that they found him is like very terrifying. It's like very scary. I think one of the things that George C. Scott says is one of my favorite lines in the movie. He says that the world is like a homicide victim or something like that. Like he's so beside himself, like he's so depressed about everything because all he does is deal with like death and like the death of like a small boy that he knew, so it's very sad. But they kind of talk a little bit, and they kind of talk a little bit about, death, and they finish off the conversation with him describing that, and you can tell Father Dyer is just like crushed, like he's just, I don't know, he's just like very like depressed all of a sudden. It does last for a little while though, but yeah, you're right. I think after that you get the second murder of the movie, the other priest.
Yes, you're back in the church, or at least some church. I'm not sure if it's the same church or not. I think it is. Doesn't matter. They're in a church, and the priest is doing the thing with the confession. And, this old lady's like, forgive me, I have sinned. And he's like, oh, blah, 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 what's your sin? And she's like, this is my 11th time or something like that, like this very large number. And he's like, what? And then he's, again, off screen, but then he is brutally murdered.
It's scary. There's something terrifying about it. She's got like an old lady voice, and the priest like becomes scared. And like you said, they don't show anything too much. You just hear like screaming and people freaking out, and like blood crawling on the floor, and like, okay, the priest, something happened to the priest. I like it too. They cut to like two little kids like praying.
Yeah.
Kneeling and praying too. That's a good shot as well. And yeah, it's like, oh shit. And then of course George C. Scott, he goes and he checks it out. He's investigating, and he looks at the body, which we don't see, but he's clearly like disgusted. He's just like, oh God, like, he looks at it and he's just like, once again, completely beside himself. He's totally just upset. And they get some DNA and stuff like that, and they're trying to like figure out what happened. And it's a bit procedural, I would say. It's very, very procedural, the movie, definitely more than the first movie. That's kind of like the heart of the movie, is that it's kind of like a detective serial killer thing. They assume that the priest and the kid were killed by the same person, but with DNA evidence, they find out that, oh no, wait, it's actually like two different people, like who committed these horrible murders. They're like, okay, that's weird. And then, he visits Father Dyer, who's in the hospital.
And that's a sweet little thing. It again shows their kind of relationship, that he and Father Dyer are really close, and he's like waiting there for him and kind of waiting for him to.
Yeah. He gets some stuffed penguin.
Yeah, I don't get this. That's great. I love that. It's just like a little stuffed penguin. He's just like, this is what you need, Father Dyer.
They should have added another 10 minutes of them like being chummy with each other, because they're both like good friends and stuff, but they don't like act like it, you know what I mean? So it's funny to watch them like talk to each other. I don't know, it's like kind of funny and cute and stuff, and that's why it's so hard when what happens later on in the movie. Of course, George C. Scott has a dream before that.
Yeah, one of the things that's so great about it is because up to this film, it has kind of refused to show the violence. It has kind of cut around the violence. Because it has been so patient and writerly. When you get these really visceral images of him walking around in like heaven or hell or something like that.
Story heaven, yeah.
Yeah, you see like, or like all these people with like their necks, like they're like stitched together, which is really cool. And it's such a surreal scene. And I think it's, all the more to Blady for going from, this point where literally it's almost all conversations to this whole dream sequence, which there's almost no dialogue. It's just him kind of walking around, but you kind of know exactly what's happening. And he sees all these different people, and it's creepy and it's weird. And you see like a jazz band playing like a heavenly, like they got these like big wings playing some sort of jazz.
He meets the little boy, which I don't know why, but when he like when he talks with the little boy, and he's like, I'm sorry you got killed. And like, I don't know why, but like that interaction to me like gets me like choked up. I don't know why. Like it's just like a very like sad, like I don't know. It's just like a very, very sad interaction for me. It's like very like it's kind of funny, because it's like, oh, I'm sorry you got killed. Like I don't know. It gets me. I don't know why. But yeah, I love that sequence. It could have been longer, honestly.
Yeah, I would have loved that.
But he at the end of the dream, he sees Father Dyer with, like you said, his neck stitched. And I think he says something along the lines, "Oh, hey, why are you here?" or something like that. And he's like, "Oh, like you know why," or something like that. And you're like, "Oh no!" And he gets a phone call the next morning to go to the hospital. And he goes to the hospital, and yeah, he finds out that his Father Dyer died under very unusual circumstances.
Yes, Father Dyer has been murdered, and all of his blood has been drained into these like cups,
Yeah,
and they've just been placed along like next to him. It's weird.
yeah, like there's no mess, like there's no smudges on the cups, like they're just like they were able to perfectly place all of his blood into all these small cups. And then right above his bed too, in blood is written, "It's a wonderful life," with two L's, by the way, two L's. It's a wonderful life. Yeah, and of course, once again, it's like this guy cannot catch a break. Like it is like his friend, like his only friend, like just like murdered horribly. And he basically says like, okay, we need to talk to everyone and no one can leave. We're basically like locking down the hospital to be sure to find out who did this. And he talks to that like that weird looking nurse. I shouldn't say weird looking, suspicious nurse.
Yeah, she does have kind of a certainly like a Nurse Ratchet kind of vibe to her. You know what I mean? From like
Yeah.
Laura Cuckoo's Nest. She really doesn't do anything that's that evil. I guess it
That's
just
the thing. She's like a what's it called, a red herring, right? Like she's kind of like a diversion from what's actually going on. She's really fine.
great casting choice though. I think, having her, she just feels suspicious.
Yeah, that actress, yeah, is very like she did something, didn't she? But it turns out she didn't. Spoiler alert. But he like questions her, and they find out that one of the last people that were there was like this old woman who's in the psychiatric ward, I guess you could say, of the hospital. I guess they're free to roam around. The hospital's kind of weird. It's like, I don't know. It's not really a complaint. It's just kind of like the way that it's like put together is kind of weird, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, he goes to the psychiatric ward and he talks to the old woman there. And the old woman, of course, is like, she's declining. She's like, "Are you the radio repairman?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm here." It's like, "Look, I have it right here." And she's like, "I knew you weren't a radio repairman. I was holding a telephone." Very funny. And yeah, he's beside himself when he talks to her because it's like, how could this woman kill someone? Like, she's a possible suspect, but it's probably not her, right? Because she's, an aging old woman who has no idea what's going on, right? And yeah, he continues to walk around. I think that's when he first goes by Karis's room.
He's walking like by these like rooms that are like locked up, like they're like locked doors. It's basically sort of like a prison, basically, that the more, I don't know if they're dangerous, but walking by all these, and he stops at one of them and he goes into the room and they're like, "This guy, and we found him 15 years ago."
He doesn't go in the room yet.
Oh, you're right. He just walks by the room.
You don't see his face either.
Right.
But he feels something. He's like, okay.
Weird. But
Yeah.
that is when he learns that they found a guy like 15 years ago, right? Like wandering around.
Yeah, I think they do tell him that. Like you said, they found him 15 years ago wandering around. They don't know who he is. And then after that is when he kind of talks about the Gemini killer a little bit more too. Because he's talking to the hospital guy and the guy's freaking out. He's like, "Why are you locking down the hospital? What the fuck?"
Yes, that's right. He's talking to like the administrator or someone because he's like, "You can only let people in and out if it's an emergency." It's a hospital. Isn't everything there an emergency? But it's fine. I get it. He's locking it down. No emergencies at this hospital. And so he's talking to the administrator person, and the administrator is like, "I don't understand why you're locking, this down. We're a hospital. We need to help people, blah, 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 blah." And he's like, "Well, actually, I think the Gemini killer's here." And they're like, "Well, that's impossible. The Gemini killer's was caught and killed. You watched him get killed
Yeah.
yourself. It's clearly like not a thing." And he's like, "But you see, the thing is we fed
the detective, but here's the thing. Yeah.
Apparently they fed the press false information about who the Gemini killer was and what he did. They told them that they put this little symbol on their back and some other detail. Oh, and then they cut the middle finger of their left hand. He's like,
Yeah.
The actual Gemini killer cut the index finger of the right hand and puts the Gemini symbol on their palm. And these killings are the same as those, which doesn't make any sense because the Gemini killer is supposed to be dead, but it can't be a copycat killer because no
Right.
one has the information unless it's, of course, someone who was working on it, which doesn't ever seem to be a possibility that they consider.
I like that scene too, where George C. Scott is trying to explain it because like he's getting yelled at by the hospital guy. And he's such a good actor. He's like, stop it, stop, stop. He's like yelling and stuff. And then right after he yells, he like starts like crying. He like starts sobbing. I love when actors are able to do that. To me, I don't know why. I always feel like that kind of shows like, I want to say skill. If you're able to like kind of like dip between those emotions very quickly and very fluently. I love George C. Scott when he's like yelling and stuff. Like he's so good. Like he's such a good like yelly. He's got a great voice. He's just this large guy, and I don't know. Love him in the movie. But yeah, so they're like, okay, crap. I think it might be the Gemini killer. And I think he does a couple quick things. One thing that he does is that he checks in on I think like the morgue people there, and they kind of discuss a thing that they have, like it's almost like a bone saw. I don't know what it's called, but they kind of talk about it, and I think they kind of say that like one of them is missing. Like, okay, like you could easily chop someone's head off with it. And then I think he also visits with the priest, which is like another priest. It's not Father Dyer, it's like another guy. And that guy's like depressed as well. Everyone in the movie is like really depressed. I also think another thing about the movie that I really like is that this movie, I think a little bit more than the first one, has like a very like apocalyptic feel to it. It feels like the world is like ending. It just feels like something bad is going to happen. Like the world is going to implode any minute, which I like a lot. I really like the tone of like it's over kind of thing. Like even right up to the end.
The tone is very like dark and depressing. It does feel like everyone's just kind of like existing. No one's really into it. They're just all there suffering through life. It's a pretty intense way to look at the world.
I like Blatty too because like I think he used to be a priest or something like that. I think he used to practice, or he was a Catholic all his life. So I like his movies. I like this movie and I like The Exorcist a lot because he really believes in this stuff. He's not like a cynic or anything when it comes to like Catholicism. Like he really does, I think, believe in like demons and in exorcisms. I think that's why the movies are so effective, because they're written so earnestly. He really does believe like in this stuff. And I wouldn't say that I believe in demons or exorcisms, but he writes about them and he talks about them in the movie so like convincing to me. I don't know. Like he really does like in his heart like believe in it. I don't know. I just really like the earnestness of it.
Yeah, I think it'd be very easy in these films to sort of create this cheesy, saccharine, kind of silly sort of experience that just feels very, I don't know, just like over the top and kind of just like bloody and
Like that.
what's that?
Preachy or something like that.
Yeah, kind of preachy, but also like I think it'd be very easy to make these films kind of like B horror films, which I don't think these films are.
I don't think so.
And I think that's a really hard line to walk, to like be able to take something that is sort of a little out there. And I think it is because Blady is, someone who seems to genuinely believe in these things, which it works. And, through the film, you kind of, right, you buy into it, which I think is a very challenging thing to do. And he does that very successfully in these films.
Absolutely. That's so fucking good, dude. Anyway, he talks to the other priest. I kind of forgot what they talk about, but I think a conversation ends with him mentioning that there is another priest somewhere who has experience with exorcisms, I believe. And then you get the other scene, which is a great scene where they check in on Father Morning, who's the priest that they talk about. And remember, he's in his like little like apartment. I love that scene. I love the imagery in that. Like feels so apocalyptic to me. It just feels like something's coming. Like he has like a little injured bird in like a shoebox, and he's like writing or something, and then he goes over and it's just dead. Like it just dies. And then the cross on his wall falls too. Remember that? The crucifix more specifically. And like Jesus is like crying blood. I love that stuff. I was raised Catholic, so not like super seriously, but I don't know. I just really like stuff like that. Like old school Catholicism stuff like really works well with horror for some reason. One of my favorite movies is The Devils, which is like all about that kind of stuff. I just really like that kind of like imagery. I think there's a lot you can do with it in a horror environment.
Yeah, that scene's pretty intense. Again, it's one of those moments where not a whole lot really happens, but it just feels so creepy. Like, right, all that basically happens is a bird dies and then a cross falls and then like there's some wind. And yet it just feels terrifying. And there's just like this underlying apocalyptic, creepy feeling. And I think it just all kind of works together in some weird way. And I think part of it is because like Blady isn't really concerned with like things moving quickly. He's a very patient filmmaker in the style of the first Exorcist in some ways. He's very willing to wait. Because I think what's so terrifying about this film, what's so terrifying about the original Exorcist, isn't the moments where people are getting their access. I mean, those are terrifying moments. But I think what's much more terrifying moments are the moments where like you don't see what's going on. Like it's the terror of the unknown. It's the terror of the not being able to see. It's the terror of waiting, which I think that moment's kind of the epitome of this, right? It's nothing really happens, and yet it's terrifying because you just don't know what's going on.
Exactly. It's just so good. And I think both movies too, the first movie and the third movie, they do also kind of like converge to its final scene. It builds up the tension and the fear up very, very well. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that, man. But like he's still doing his detective shit. Once again, I think he talks to the old woman about like the cups because they found her DNA on them. How could she have done this? And then I think he talks to that really weird doctor. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's the conversation he has with the doctor when the doctor tells him he's like practicing, he's like reading off like writing that he has about Karis. And he tells the detective, you know, the guy in there, I think he says he's the Gemini killer, right? And he's like, I think maybe you should go in and talk to him, is basically what I think the conversation he has with the doctor. And then I think you get the first conversation with Father Karis.
So he's like preparing to say this thing to
Yeah.
detective. Did like Father Karras like come to him at some point and say like, hey, you need to like say these things, or like
They say that later in the movie. Because remember, he kills himself. The doctor kills himself.
Yeah, I can't figure out why he killed himself.
Because he was manipulated by the Gemini killer because he wants to be known.
Okay.
Remember, he's always telling like George C. Scott, like, tell the press I'm this guy, da 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 da. Like he manipulated the doctor to tell the detective to talk to him. That's why he's preparing, because he's like telling him you should need to tell him this.
No, it all makes sense.
Threaten him or something like that. And yeah.
Gotcha. So he goes in to see Father Karras, same Father Karras who jumped out of the window 15 years ago and supposedly died. And so after he jumped out of the window, Father Karras's soul leaves his body. And as his soul is leaving the body, the Gemini killer's soul, it like squeezes its way in. Like the devil kind of like, I don't know, I guess he's just like holding Gemini's soul for some reason. And he's like, okay. So he like squeezes him in, like pushed him into Father Karras's body. But of course, you know, that guy was basically dead. So for 15 years, he's like trying to get his brain to work, which is why he's there now. And so for like the last 15 years, he's been trying to do what he's at now to get to this point where he can like function as an actual human.
And what you just said is, of course, explained by the Gemini killer himself, which George C. Scott sees Father Karras, at least initially, and we initially see him too. But then we get who he actually is, which is the Gemini killer, who is played by Brad Dourif, who is unbelievably insane. He's incredible in this movie. I love Brad Dourif in the movie.
I read that originally he wanted to have like a transition between all these different faces, like as he was talking, and like fade from one face to another. Because right, it's the idea that it's not only the Gemini killer, but it's also Satan and all these different things. But apparently the technology was at the point that it looked like shit. So he was like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, you're right. Like, because the detective, George C. Scott, asked him who he is, and he's like, oh, we are Legion, we are many, or something like that. So you're right. It's like many different spirits and souls kind of accumulated in one body. And I think also, I think it's established too, whenever the Gemini killer kills someone, I think he gets their soul and, you know, he becomes stronger too. So they're Legion, you know. I didn't know about the face thing though. Personally, if they did that, I feel like it would be a little distracting, because I think Brad Dourif in the role is incredible. He's absolutely astounding. Maybe one of the greatest performances in any horror movie that I've ever seen. He's so good. He's like insane. He's so intense. And once again, you know, it's a very writerly movie. You do get these like really long monologues of Brad Dourif, like talking about very, very difficult things at length. But he's so good. I love how he's always like crying. Like he's always has tears in his eyes. Not because he's like sad, but it's just almost like he's like, I don't know. It's hard to explain it. So he's just like, I guess it's just like the intensity, you know what I mean, of being alive or something like that. He's just crying. And he does a thing too where he's able to like kind of like implement dynamics. So when he yells, he really yells, but when he's being like quiet and subtle, the way that he speaks and talks is also incredible. It's just like one of the best performances I've ever seen in any horror movie.
Yeah, it's a very admirable performance, certainly. I mean, honestly, all of the performances are really well.
Really good.
Yeah, I mean, not only the actors do a great job, but that also takes all the more to the director to be able to direct these performances that are just kind of, I would say, like the performances just have a lot of range, which they really have to for this kind of film, especially when you have a film that is a lot of dialogue, is a lot of talking, it puts a lot more pressure on the actors. So for them to take this and do what they did with it is just incredible.
And I think in the first conversation, he describes killing Father Dyer, right? Like using like a tube and like squeezing him. He's like, every last drop, the way he enunciates words, it's so creepy. He's so good. One of the greatest actors. He basically tells the detective, like, look, you need to tell the press that I am still alive. Otherwise, more people will be killed. And he refuses. And I think, George C. Scott goes on his way after the first conversation. I think he does some more detective work. I think he talks to the nurse again. I think they just talk about like the Gemini killer or something like that, and about like how they found him, what's he like. I think they kind of established that at certain parts of the day, he becomes catatonic and his brain activity is off the charts. And then I think also George C. Scott, he goes to a church and he reads like from a Bible, from a book, and he finds out that like some of the stuff that Brad Dourif said are like exorcism stuff. You know what I mean? Like stuff for like in exorcisms. And he reads also like about Legion, which is another thing he reads in it. He's doing his thing and just trying to find out and what the heck is going on. And then the scene of the next person who's killed, which is of course astounding.
Yeah, it's like they're in the dark hallway and
So
this nurse, doing her thing. She's just being a nurse. She's walking around. And this scene's kind of long. Like it's just like a one shot. For like a long time, it's just her like, doing her thing, being a nurse. And you're like, what's going on? Nothing's happening. And the nurse walks away. And then from behind her is like this person dressed in like a white robe, I guess you would describe it.
yeah.
And he has the big like cutting sword.
That whole part is impeccably directed. Like you said, they film her from far away down the hall. You can hear them from far away, like they don't feel close. They do feel like down the hall. And they do a fake out scare where she goes into a room to check something and like the patient scares her. Then she goes back out and then like you're like, what's going on? Because it is a long scene. It kind of takes a while to build up. And then I love when it zooms in with like kind of the music cue to behead her. That's like one of the greatest jump scares ever, just in terms of like from a technical point of view. And then I think after that, she dies, the poor nurse. And George C. Scott, of course, is what the fuck. And he goes visit Brad Dourif again. I think this is their second and last conversation. It's also Brad Dourif's second monologue, of course, as well.
I don't really remember what they talked about in the second conversation, other than like I know he gives like hints of what's to come, which is that Brad Dourif is going to take over someone's body and have that old woman murder his daughter.
That's basically like how it ends. It transitions to it. That scene's really long where they're talking to each other for a while. I love it too, the part where they're talking about Father Karras and Brad Dourif like sits up and he's like, he will never. Like he's like screaming at the top of his lungs about how Father Karras will never escape hell. Like he is in hell. He is with us. Like he's gone. Like he will never, ever, ever escape.
So like partly the murders are because the Gemini killer is a murderer. Yeah. But it's also like revenge, right? Because of like the Exorcist, like that's why they kill Father Dyer and stuff, because like Satan or whoever is pissed off because
I don't think it's technically Satan. I believe in the second movie, it's established that it's the demon Pazuzu, which is like a mythological demon. So it's not technically Satan, but you could more or less surmise that it's basically the devil. It's Satan, it's demons, it's a force from hell, you might say. And they're pissed off. He's using the Gemini killer to, I guess, do what I guess demons want, is people to get murdered. Like, I guess a cold-hearted serial killer is probably, like a metaphorical demon in itself among us, right? Like, who would be able to, obviously, you know what I mean, like, from a simplistic point of view, especially this one in this movie, who's very, like, I'm very, very happy that I get to kill a lot of more people now, right? Like Brad Dourif, like, the Gemini killer is just, like, just super evil. Yeah, and they have a long conversation, it's just, like, a really good long conversation about what he wants to do, what happened, like you said, to Father Karras and to him. I think he says too, like he's like, I was so mad that I died. Like I had so much more killing that I wanted to do. And I think he also says like, yeah, and the devil or Satan or whoever, he agreed like that I had more killing that I needed to do.
I think he refers to him as like the master or something like that. They never say like Satan or devil or whatever, but it's referred to as like some sort of like master sort of situation.
So they have their conversation and he says some stuff that George C. Scott is trying to like think about what's going on. I think you get the other scene where he goes into the psychiatric ward. One of the old ladies is crawling around on the ceiling. That's great. It's kind of silly. I will say I like it a lot, but it is a little silly. It kind of comes across a little as comedic to me. It's still very creepy the way that like there's almost like no sound. She doesn't make any noise and stuff, and it's like very very creepy. And I think he discovers a dead nurse, and it's revealed that one of the old women who is in the ward has taken her nurse clothes and is going somewhere. And George C. Scott kind of connects the dots from the conversation with Brad Dourif, like you said. And he's like, we gotta go, 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 go. And he's like, go, go, go. And he's like, yo, like, drive, drive. They're like driving around Georgetown. And I think also they like, someone calls his family and they're like, hey, like a nurse is gonna come over for some reason. I like how his family, like, I don't know, his family are just kind of like happy and like go lucky the whole time, which is kind of funny. I kind of like that juxtaposition. But she gets there and she's like sitting there, and George C. Scott, after like almost like hitting several cars, arrives there and he's like, all right, where's the nurse or whatever? And they're like, oh, you know, your friend is in, or your nurse, I don't know why she's here, she's in the other room. And then she like gets out the big pair of scissors, like almost chops the head off of his daughter, but she's saved just in time.
When he pulls her away, it looks a little wonky.
It does look a little wonky. It looks kind of weird, but whatever. It's like a split second though.
Yeah, it's like a split. I'm just trying to figure out like why, like, did they use like some sort of computer imaging to? I guess I don't know. Like, because it's just him pulling her away. Maybe like, I don't know. I guess they don't want her like close to the giant shark beheading thing.
I feel you. And then they have like a big fight. She's strong now because she has the power of the Gemini killer. It's basically revealed like what he's been doing is the Gemini being killer has been using the weak brains of these patients to go out and do his killing. I guess that's a good idea if you're a devil demon serial killer guy.
Seems like the way to go.
He was getting the job done. But they fight the old woman and they defeat her. She does the thing where she like leans back and she's like this, which is like very creepy.
And the reason they defeat her, right? Because they cut back to the hospital, and that's where the original Exorcist takes place.
I think they defeat her just because like it stopped, and then they do the exorcism. I think
I thought the reason that they were able to defeat her was like he was there.
the priest.
The priest was there, like attacking, and so like the guy had to like stop like taking control of the old woman.
My interpretation is that after that interaction, I like to think that like George C. Scott like immediately called Father Morning and he like arrives. You know what I mean? Because it's like we tried everything. Now we have to. We know like something's messed up. We know like it's an exorcism. It's time to like, get out the big guns and like finish this off. Boom. I guess it would kind of maybe make more sense. Either way, you get the fucking exorcism scene.
Yes.
Father Morning shows up.
This is a scene that I've wanted to talk about this entire podcast because I was a bit thrown off by the scene because it's very different from the rest of the film.
There's a reason for that too, of course.
Right? There's like blood and gore. And of course, the reason is this wasn't the original ending. This is not the ending that our director wanted. He wanted something like the rest of the film, right? He wanted people talking, sitting around, and then, you know, at the end, just the guy getting shot in the head, like that being it.
I think the ending scene was literally like George C. Scott walks in and he just shoots him.
Yep. That was basically it. I think it was supposed to be like a short little like dialogue between the two, and then he just shoots him in the head, and that's it. And the studio watches this and they're like,
no,
wait a minute, this is called The Exorcist. Where's The Exorcist?
It's got to have the exorcism in it. Like the first movie. Look, I'll just say up front, I think this is an example of studio intervention gone in a good way. Normally studios are really bad and they have horrible taste and they don't know what they're talking about. This, I think, is a good example where the studio intervened and they were like, look, we need to have something like this. And then Blatty was like, fine. And then he made something very, very good out of it that I think is way more eventful and interesting and intense than just like George C. Scott shooting a guy in the face.
I definitely agree that the scene, like on its own, very good, very entertaining, very intense, great special effects, very horrific. I love the scene on its own, but as it fits in the movie, I don't think it works because like the whole film is so patient, it is so quiet, it's so waiting, and it never shows violence. And to go from that to this, it feels like reshoots, which is what it is. It doesn't feel like it's in the movie. I think like if this was its own thing, and like if the whole movie had been like that, awesome, great. Or, even though I agree that like an ending where the guy just walks in and shoots him is a lot less entertaining, I think it would have fit in the movie better. I just feel like it feels almost like two separate films that were kind of mushed together. And both films on their own, really good films. But I think that even though it's very entertaining and horrific and awesome, for me, it doesn't fit, which I felt kind of frustrated by, I guess. And it also feels like kind of sudden. Like, yes, you're introduced Father Morning earlier, but like, it doesn't feel like it fits with the rest of the film. Like, it just feels like they had to do an Exorcist. And they're like, okay, go do an Exorcist. Like, there's no like lead up to do the Exorcist. Like, it's just like, we're going to do an Exorcist now. Like, if they had like early on, like talked about, oh, maybe we'll do an Exorcist later.
They do with Father Morning.
Yeah.
They talk about him, and then you see the scene where you see.
Yeah, they talk about him, they show him, but like they don't like ever talk about doing an Exorcist, and it's just like it's there.
I politely disagree. I think that like Exorcist 1 and Exorcist 3, they're both very slow, patient movies, and I think they both build up and build up, build up to a very intense, powerful, crazy moment at the very, very end. I mean, it is technically reshoots, so you're right. So it definitely is a little like out of place, you might say. I don't care. So I just like that it builds up, and the whole movie is super patient, super quiet, and super great. And it has like little moments here and there. And then it builds up to like the really, really big, crazy scene, which I think has some great writing too. That George C. Scott comes in after Father Morning is incapacitated after his skin peels off on the ceiling, and he's put against the wall like George C. Scott. I love his monologue about what he believes in. They're like, "What do you believe in?" He's like, "I believe in death. I believe in murder. I believe in infidelity." Like, that's like a great monologue. And then Father Morning is still alive, and he's able to, for a second, stop Father Karras with the Lord or whatever. And for a second, I guess, while the power of the Gemini killer or the demon or whatever is held back, he shoots Father Karras. Boom. Of course, while George C. Scott is on the wall, incapacitated, the floor opens up, and you get like the image that they described at the beginning of the movie of the young boy that was killed, which is great. I think the sound design and the music in the movie is also very good. It's worth mentioning. But yeah, they stop him, shoots Father Karras, stops all the demon shit. And I think the final shot is that they have a proper burial for Father Karras. And I think that's the end of the movie, unless there's something else you wanted to mention. I understand your reservations with the final scene. I'd rather have that than not. Than just like the boring, like, I don't know, I would rather just have that scene than something else. I just prefer the big giant crazy, and with still has great writing and still has great special effects. I just prefer that, but I see what you mean. It is out of place, you might say, a little bit. We gotta have the exorcism in the movie. We gotta have it in there. Remember the first movie? I think Peter Blatty also wanted it to be called Legion. That's the other thing about the movie. So I love the movie, obviously, but I think like a lot of people don't appreciate, because I think like general audiences, when they think of like horror sequels, I think they kind of like turn their noses up to them, because they're like, there's great horror movie sequels, by the way, incredible movies. But I think people turn up their noses when they're like, The Exorcist 3, like, what the hell would that be? You know what I mean? I think people automatically think like bad things about horror movie sequels. They just feel like it's probably going to be another rehash. It's going to dwarf in comparison to the original. So why would I watch the sequel? And I think Blatty did want it to be called Legion. And I think maybe if it was called Legion, maybe it wouldn't have that kind of like horror movie sequel kind of thing to it, right? So that's kind of disappointing. Actually, I kind of wish it was just called Legion. I think it would be more of a celebrated classic. Obviously, people love the movie and I love it, but Exorcist 3, I don't know.
But then again, if it was called Legion, they probably wouldn't have had the Exorcist scene at the end.
That's true. But, it's still a great movie, and I love it. Final thoughts.
So I came into this movie skeptical because The Exorcist, for me, is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I think it's like top three, honestly. It's a masterful film in
Yeah.
pretty much every way. And, coming into a sequel, as you kind of talk about, of the kind of expectations, which isn't really fair to put these kind of expectations on Exorcist 3. But that first opening scene, I liked a lot. I love the church. One of my favorite scenes in the whole film is that scene we talked about earlier where it's like a POV of the guy just walking down the street and like you see like a boy or two and it's just like so slow and patient and creepy. And I love those moments where he's just willing to sit and just be there. I got a little tired of the establishing shots of like shot, 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 and then we're here. Like I get it, you did it. It does feel at times like, I mean, because it's true that Peter Bellini is an inexperienced director, which isn't his fault. He'd only made one film before this. Although has a lot of great ideas, it does feel like a novelist who makes movies. I have some problems when it comes to like novelists making movies. The famous example is, of course, Stephen King, who hated The Shining movie, which I would argue is, again, one of the greatest horror movies of all time. He remade it into a TV series in like the 90s, which I haven't seen, but I've seen parts and terrible. Everyone hates it.
I think that was directed by Mick Garris, right? I think Mick Garris directed it. Yeah, he's done a bunch of horror films. Yeah, I'm guessing it pales in comparison.
I think what often happens, and you don't really see this the other way around, is you don't really see a lot of filmmakers. The only one I can think of is Quentin Tarantino, who become novelists, because filmmakers recognize that these two are just different art forms, and that's fine. And when people say, well, the movie isn't as good as the book or blah blah blah, it's like, well, they're not the fucking same thing. They're just different things. They're on their own. And when novelists become filmmakers, I think sometimes they have this idea that they can just do what they did in the book in the movie. And the fact is they're two different mediums and can't do the same thing. And I think sometimes this film suffers from that. I think it suffers from this idea of the writer trying to make a novel and just basically putting visuals to that novel, which isn't how books are adapted into movies. It just doesn't work that way. I do love some of the conversations. It's very clear that Peter Bellini is an incredible writer, and some of the conversations are just so well written and so interesting. I love the patience of the first 2/3 of the film. I love how it's willing to wait. I love everything, honestly, up until we get The Exorcist. I think there's a lot of great stuff there. One of the best murder scenes is, as we talked about, that scene where they kill the nurse, right? It's just, yeah, just so willing to wait and be patient and to, just allow the horror to be in and of itself. But when it came to that final Exorcist, not that it isn't a great scene. I think the special effects are amazing. I mean, they spent almost half the budget on those special effects for that. That last scene cost $5 million on a film that cost $11 million to make. It looks great. It's terrifying. It's intense. But by this point, I had signed up for a certain type of film. That's my own fault, right? I put these certain expectations by the time I got to this point in the film because I'd been sold this set of goods that this is the type of film you're watching. So when it changes, right, when it adjusts, I don't know, it bothered me. It just didn't feel right. And the fact that, Peter Bellini himself to this day doesn't feel like that's the right ending, right? He's still like, he doesn't feel like that was what he wanted. And, perhaps that has also shaded my view of it because I have, a lot of problems with studios having any, honestly, any say on what an artist and this set of artists, right, want to do. But, this or that, all this is to say that I did enjoy the film a lot, but I am going to only give this film a 6 out of 10, simply because even though all the parts by themselves are good, I just think as a whole, it functions weirdly.
That's fair enough, but I do think, I don't know, like for me, I don't know. I think that the movie, like, I think Blatty, for his inexperience, I think he directs the hell out of it. And I do not mind, for me, I know you have your reservations about like, I guess like writing and novelists and movies and stuff like that. I don't mind long dialogue. I don't mind long conversations or anything like that. In fact, I love it. You know what I mean? I love stuff like that. I appreciate stuff like that. Yeah, I really don't mind it at all. I don't mind a movie that has a lot of dialogue or has very little dialogue or long conversations, whatever you want to say. All that stuff doesn't really bother me that much. I think Blatty does a really good job with, how the movie looks, how the movie sounds. I think all the acting is really good. Once again, we talked about the final scene. I don't mind it at all. I think it's just, a great conclusion. Yeah, it's really hard for me to like point out things that I really dislike. I think everything that you said, all your reservations, I think are very valid, and I would reciprocate them for sure, because some of the stuff can be kind of hard to reckon with, because yeah, you're right, it is a very writerly movie, and that can be kind of like weird, especially since the first one is not really like that. I know too, like there are like scenes, in the first movie, the scene where they're sitting on the steps,
Mm-hmm.
there's a deleted scene where they have a conversation together. And it's like kind of an elongated conversation. I think it's just different sensibilities though, of course. Whether that scene of them talking or not, I think either way it works. You know what I mean? You can have them sit in silence, which says a lot, or they could have like a really well written conversation about something, which I think also says a lot. But yeah, I love The Exorcist III. It's so good. It's just crazy, over the top, great horror movie. I do think with the first movie still reserves the right as like a classic, like a horror movie classic. I think it still reserves that title. But I think the third movie is about as good, in my opinion. I think they both just have different sensibilities, but I think they're both equally interesting and impactful. I'll give it a 9 out of 10 for sure.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find me at Austinlugo12.
You can find me on Twitter at ADHarp24.
And you can find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at With Nothing to Say Podcast. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, guys.